Hey there, this is Phil. Welcome back to the show. I'm here with Christian Taylor.
Hey, Phil Vischer.
Hi, Christian.
Nice to see you.
Teal?
Yes, we'll go with that.
Okay, we're going with Teal.
Whatever you say.
And Sky Jitani.
Hi.
Who is patterned.
He kind of phones it in.
Patterned.
Do you notice that?
Yeah, he gets surly.
I got 1 week of summer left before the kids go back to school.
Yeah, so isn't that a good thing?
Yeah, but I'm saying like it's.
Why are you surly? Why is that
surly.
making you surly?
Why am I?
You've
Because I wore
stopped
plaid.
shaving. You're drinking LaCroix, two-fisted. You're surly.
Yeah, well, I got a couple days left of chaos before we can settle back into normalcy.
Okay. All right. Hey, it's a podcast. What do you know? Hey, it's a podcast. And we got video. Hey, it's a podcast. So lend an ear. The Phil Vischer podcast starts right here. Oh, we'll talk to Sky.
Hi, Phil.
And Christian, too.
I'm going to take extra long because he's just like, hi, Phil.
Yeah, I know.
Hi,
I know.
Phil.
Hi, Christian. How are you?
I am happy as a clam.
That's fantastic. And we've got a guest right here for you. His name's Josh. Hi, Josh.
I was told there'd be no singing.
Hey, it's a podcast. So lend an ear. The Phil Vischer podcast starts right here. The Phil Vischer podcast starts right here.
Did you not tell him about the ukulele?
Oh, I warned him about the ukulele, and Sky tried to shade him to dislike it right from the get-go.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Tainting
but
our
he's
audience.
too smart. He's too smart to fall for that.
Awesome. Why is he so smart?
Because he's so smart because he knows the ukulele is a classic instrument of the common folk.
Okay.
And that elites like Sky are always trying to...
You have a crack in your ukulele.
Yeah, that's been there a long time.
Oh.
I cracked my ukulele
I just was noticing.
filming the theme song for the talk show.
All the way back then?
Yeah.
5 years ago?
Yeah, that's when it cracked. That's
Okay.
when I cracked my ukulele.
Did you hit it up against a wall?
Josh, have you ever cracked your ukulele? Either literally or metaphorically?
I have a ukulele about 2 rooms away. I'd go grab
Really?
it, but I don't think that would help you out. It's actually not mine, it's my daughter's. So,
Okay.
and
Exactly.
I don't know how to play it.
Exactly.
Sky's daughter has a ukulele too.
I think there's probably a lot of young girls that have ukuleles, and Phil.
Yes.
Because... And Tiny Tim, see,
You
he's
know,
manly.
Speaking of that, I was just in Boulder, Colorado on Pearl Street, and there was this awesome, 10 or 12-year-old girl with a ukulele
Yeah.
stopping traffic.
Yeah.
She was phenomenal.
With her, whacking cars with her ukulele?
No, she was actually singing and playing
She wasn't
it.
protesting?
No, she wasn't
Okay.
protesting.
Okay. So Sky and I just got back from where?
Okoboji, Iowa.
We just got back from Okoboji, Iowa, the
I was
Okoboji
not
Bible
there
Conference.
again.
I know, but
It's like
someday...
my 20th year
someday
of not going to Okoboji.
You'll make it. We both taught classes.
What'd you teach?
Sky, well, we'll start with Sky.
Okay.
Sky taught a class, new material.
Totally new material.
Totally new material
Testing
on...
it out. Doubt.
On doubt.
Is that where your devotionals are coming from?
I doubt it.
Not entirely. The problem, but the content for the classes, it's new content, so it's really hard to make into compact little devotionals because it's more complicated and everyday built from the previous. So I'm thinking I tested the material because I want to make it into a book that would go along with What's Wrong with Religion.
Sure.
Then we'd have another one called formatted the same way, but it's What's Wrong with Doubt.
Well, I have really been enjoying these doubt devotionals, and it's more talking about wrestling and
Right.
the ways that we experience the lack of desire or lack of relationship.
I think we should call them doubt votionals.
That's
You could trademark
Creative.
that, and then
I like that.
you'd have a revenue stream.
Right, and I can market it to atheists.
All right,
That's
so
right.
your class.
I did. My brother and I taught a 5-day class, and they're like hour and a half each session.
Wow.
It's a lot of stuff. My brother's a college professor, a law professor, so he had more stuff. It was about culture. It was about
Okay.
living Christian in
Christianly in today's culture?
Yeah, basically. And my brother covered law, gender, politics, race relations. It was like sticky issues. And this is in rural Iowa with a bunch of Iowans, so it's kind of fun. And southern Minnesotans and Omahaians that come up for it, and some South Dakota-ians that come down for it.
Okay.
So, and then I covered Adventures in New Atheism,
Interesting.
and then Science and Faith. and I told the history of creation science and the kind of the fundamentalist movement in America and the reaction against Darwinism and the history of that reaction.
That's a lot.
Well, yeah,
Did you guys record these?
Yes.
Can we get a copy of them?
I don't know.
I didn't get any copies.
I would love to hear these.
They did record them at the conference.
I did so much research.
You did?
For mine, and I put together like 50 slides for each one with pictures of everything I was talking about, and I actually thought after the fact, maybe I could turn those into something like little documentaries or something, because it was kind of interesting. What's new atheism and what was old atheism, and what happened to old atheism that we needed a new atheism,
You know
which is
what we
an
should
interesting
do,
story.
Phil?
What should we do, Sky?
And I'm talking, I should not be sharing this on the air.
Uh-oh.
Because this is total
Nobody
brainstorm.
listens to our podcast.
Because I'm
Yeah.
thinking, remember I did that class on the origins of the religious right?
Yes.
And that
Yes.
became one of our most listened to
episode ever.
Right. If we took like that kind of content plus your content that you did for this, we could build like a whole
A library.
a library of
A homeschool library.
no.
But I think that's a great idea, honestly.
Because people, I think, are intrigued by it. Like,
but it would have to be a whole nother podcast, really.
Or it's like a little online
Extra.
class or seminar.
Sure.
We could do it, because I'm putting together some online classes for Bible study for family devotional. We could use that same technology to do little online mini classes.
You could.
Could you sell Netflix on Christian documentaries?
I don't know, but I'm in the process of producing my own documentary. So
Yeah,
once
I
I go
know.
through this, I'll be able to
there's some
help you out.
pretty crappy documentaries on Netflix, so I'm sure they are open to
God
ideas.
bless them.
But the point being,
problem
I
is
think
paying
people,
for them up
I think
front.
the reason why those topics are intriguing for folks is because they assume, or a lot of people anyway, assume that Christianity as practiced by evangelical white America has always been this way.
Yeah.
They have no
Right.
historical context for realizing actually it's a very new,
Right.
in some cases incredibly new phenomenon when you're dealing with certain forms of political engagement and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So the context, I think, is
fascinating
makes people
stuff.
rethink their commitment
And
to some
then
of those
show
ideas.
people pictures of what you're talking about, and they say, "Oh, I get it. It looks like something." Like when I taught the Scopes monkey trial. That's
Yeah.
part of my talk on faith and science. And when you actually see, there's lots of historical footage of the Scopes monkey trial, including the monkey that was dressed up in a suit every day in the local drugstore to entertain the tourists that were coming to town for the monkey trial. I got a picture of the monkey. So there's lots of
Which
stuff.
few people know is the origin of the phrase, "Can I touch your monkey?"
I don't think that's true.
I think it is.
I don't
There
think
is
that's
there
true.
is
That's
a
where
phrase called "Can I touch
That's
your
where
even
monkey?"
sure
Saturday
that's
Night
a
Live
phrase.
took it from.
I've never even heard of that.
I'm not even sure that's a.
guess
Remember
I'm out
that
of it.
Peter
I'm
from
sure it's-
Sprockets on Saturday Night Live?
No,
Mike
I have
Myers?
no idea.
Oh
what
yeah,
you're
I
talking
remember
about.
that. But I also remember Peter Gabriel saying "Shock the monkey."
Shock the monkey.
I do
Shock
remember
the
that.
monkey. Yeah. Josh,
Yeah, I'm here.
what's your favorite monkey-related pop culture reference?
I didn't catch the touch the monkey one until you mentioned sprockets. Then it clicked for me. So,
Yeah. Okay.
I'm with you there.
Okay.
Well, so can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
What are we talking about today?
We're talking about Josh's.
10 minutes in.
We're talking about Josh's new book. We do have some news that what I wanted to touch on before then, besides the fact that I need to do a shout out.
Okay.
To Josh, but not to this Josh.
Okay, my son Josh?
No, not to your son Josh, to a different Josh. I was driving to Okoboji, and I was in the middle of Wisconsin on my way to Okoboji, and
Wait a second.
I stopped at a gas station. You take the northern route because it's
Okay.
so far in northern Iowa. So I stopped at a gas station. It was a Quick Trip in Onalaska, Wisconsin.
I know where that is.
Wow.
The Quick Trip in Onalaska?
Yeah.
Have you been there?
Probably.
Okay.
I don't understand why it's called Onalaska.
I don't know why it's called Quick Trip with a K. KW. Anyway, I was at Quick Trip in Onalaska, and I'm buying whatever snacks my kids need to make it through the next 2 hours of the trip. So mostly sugar. And the guy behind the counter says, "Are you Phil Vischer?" And I say,
Wow.
"Yeah." And he says, "I love your podcast."
Wow.
He didn't say I love VeggieTales. He didn't say I love What's in the Bible. He
That
says, I
is
love your
unusual.
podcast. And his name was Josh.
Hi,
he had a name
Josh.
tag on. So I'm saying, hi, Josh. Thanks for calling me out in the Quick
Thanks
Trip
for listening, too.
in Onalaska, and thanks for listening. Okay, we do need to bring up a little bit of the weekend because we just came through an insane
Yeah, it was heartbreaking.
weekend of what happened in Charlottesville and what happened. I mean, it's nothing new that there's racists in America. I don't think that's new.
No, definitely not new.
But they've kind of come out of the woodwork.
They've kind of congealed into a new
They've lost their hoods.
and left their hoods.
And
They're in other people's
And their
hoods
capes.
now.
And they're going to lots of people's hoods.
What is the story? When you look at that, because you wrote a piece about it.
Well, I didn't write a piece. I wrote a devotional.
You wrote a devotional about the news.
Well, in response to the news.
Yeah. Ed Stetzer wrote a nice piece about
He
it
did.
that you pointed out. And
he was quick on the response.
He was very quick. I'm not going to be that quick because when you're that quick, often you say things you regret.
But his was very thoughtful, and he wrote it actually Saturday evening, which I think is because he was saying this is what pastors need to talk about on Sunday.
So I'm looking at my religion news service news feed this morning, and the stories are piling up. And so I just wanted to read the headlines.
Sure.
I didn't even have time to read all the stories. There are so many stories coming in about this, so I'm just going to read some headlines. First story, Evangelicals, Trump, and the Politics of Redemption. Today, far too many evangelical Christians are tools of the Trump presidency, writes Peter Weiner. Next story, Charlottesville, what I said from the pulpit yesterday. White supremacist Christian nationalism must be clearly repudiated by all followers of Jesus Christ, writes David Gushee. Next story, Donald Trump, relativist in chief. No, Mr. President, there was wrong on only one side in Charlottesville, says Jeffrey Selkin, the side that you cannot unequivocally condemn, which he technically did this morning, a few hours ago. It's Monday as we record this, but it took him 36 hours. Next headline, after Charlottesville, will white pastors finally take racism seriously? There's no greater need to apply the biblical call to speak the truth in love than in the area of white supremacy and the church, writes Jamar Tisby. And then, just to break that up a little bit, those are like 5 stories in a row. The next story, you'll never be as radical as this 18th century Quaker dwarf.
That's really along your line.
Okay.
New York Times is telling the story of Benjamin Lay, a hunchback as well as a dwarf who was the world's first revolutionary abolitionist.
Oh, that's cool.
That's an interesting
Is he
story.
still alive?
That would make an interesting
What do
movie.
you mean he's still alive?
He was 18th century
18th century
abolitionist.
I didn't hear that part. Sorry.
Yeah, he lived in the 1700s.
Abolition does not seem that long
A
ago.
radical hunchback Quaker dwarf.
In the 1700s.
He did have other career options.
I want to make a movie about him.
And who,
Johnny Depp.
That's what I was going to ask. Who's it going to star? Or do you have to use CGI?
Okay, let's pull in Josh. Josh,
Yes.
who would star as the radical abolitionist hunchback Quaker dwarf?
You're probably heading the right direction with Johnny Depp.
How about the bad elf? The angry elf.
Peter Dinklage.
Oh, Peter Dinklage.
Yeah.
He's the guy from
Yeah.
Game of Thrones.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and Elf.
He's a good
Yeah.
angry elf.
He does good angry.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay. Is there what else do you want to say about?
Well, here's there's kind
everybody
of
has
two.
something
I
to
think
say.
there's 2 categories of stories here. One is what actually happened in Charlottesville. Charlottesville, and then there is the reaction or non-reaction to Trump and the reaction or non-reaction to what Trump said.
Right.
So, and I think those you got to kind of look at those separately, although they are related because a lot of the neo-Nazi alt-right folks who gathered in Charlottesville explicitly said they were doing this because they felt emboldened by Donald Trump's election. So there is a connection. The part I'm having trouble with is this is a president who loves to spout off about things without any time or reflection.
Yeah.
Right? This is a guy who unilaterally announces they're no longer going to allow transgender folks to serve in the military without ever consulting with the military about the decision. Like, he does this kind of stuff all the time.
Yeah.
So it's a little shocking that his initial comments about what happened over the weekend didn't come out via Twitter, and when they did come out, he was, waffling on it and saying it's from all sides and blah blah blah. And then it isn't until Monday, 3 days later, that he finally comes out with a statement where he repudiates the white nationalists.
Yeah.
So
but
it's
it's
just,
also a written statement.
right. So
it's nothing off the cuff.
And he prides himself on authenticity and sincerity and being real. And so the one time where you want a president to be off the cuff and real and visceral in the reaction, he's calculated and scripted, and it just, the whole thing stinks to high heavens.
Well, what's even more maddening is that when he is angry with anyone, he calls them out specifically.
Like he did this morning with the CEO of Merck.
Right.
Exactly. And yet, there's clearly a face of the white supremacists in David Duke, and there are others, which he could, if he truly felt.
Right.
And the irony
you
is,
can tell what he feels strongly about because he tweets about what he feels strongly about.
So it's clear he doesn't feel strongly about this. And the irony is he harped on Obama and his administration for years for failing to use the word Islamic terrorists.
Right.
And yet he won't, or at least didn't until this morning, identify the groups and the philosophy that has driven this domestic violence and domestic terrorism. So the hypocrisy is hard to ignore.
Well, so, and then...
go.
What's hard for me is to hear, even in my own family, people be angry with people like you or I, that we aren't giving him enough credit for the initial statement that he came out and said, which is there's, anger on all sides or whatever. Everybody's responsible for this kind of thing. They're angry with us because they're saying, well, he did make a statement. Well, he did say this is sad. And that should be enough. But we're too critical and we're too negative. And
he also has a long history of not being outspoken in denouncing white supremacists. This isn't like this is the first time he's stumbled on this issue.
But what's so confusing is people like in my family that are Christians and who, think differently. It's hard for me to
Which has led to this story. I'll read you the headline. What is wrong with white Christians?
I guess that's what I'm asking.
Came out this morning. And this is a new study, survey from the Washington Post and the Kaiser Family Foundation. Christians, the study found, are more than twice as likely to blame a person's poverty on individual failings than Americans who are atheists or have no specific religious affiliation. White evangelical Christians who voted overwhelmingly for President Trump and continue to be some of his most steadfast supporters are especially wedded to this worldview. Half of white Catholics also cite lack of effort, read laziness, rather than difficult circumstances as the primary reason why people are poor. Less than a third of African American Christians agree with this point of view. So of all the religious groups, the one most likely to say you're poor because you don't work hard enough and there's nothing that society has any responsibility in, white evangelical Protestants are the number one people group in America to take that position.
Do they hypothesize as to the explanation?
No.
Phil, I can add some anecdotal evidence to that too. We wrote at Think Christian, this was in May of 2016. Think Christian is my day job where I'm editor of Faith and Culture website. We were writing about a Barna study that revealed some similar statistics you just spouted about white evangelicals' attitudes towards racism. And we've experienced that regularly at Think Christian when we'll write an article about rapper Kendrick Lamar, or we wrote about the portrait of Harriet Tubman being put on U.S. currency. Overwhelmingly, the comments that we would get in response were negative, and often thinly veiled racist responses as well, just veiled enough that they could be published. So, Trump is a distraction here. He's unfortunately a distraction that still holds extensive powers. And that's why we can't entirely dismiss him. But I think worrying about how he responds to something on this topic is not really going to do us any good. I think white evangelicals need to look at those stats first and ask these questions that, you just asked, Sky. Why? Why is this deeply anti-biblical posture the immediate posture taken when issues of race come up?
Can I share an anecdotal experience?
Yeah. Yes.
And it's really a question, actually.
Okay.
Being in Boulder this past week, I don't know if you guys know this, but there's an enormous homeless population there. Did you know this?
In Boulder?
Yes,
No,
because
I
the
was not aware of
policies
that.
there are extremely welcoming.
Okay.
So a lot of homeless people come there because they are treated pretty well there. Well, again, white evangelical Christians that I know, when discussing this issue, were saying this is a scourge on this society, and this has been a terrible choice by the city of Boulder to just welcome them here. They kill people, they take these things, they do horrible stuff, and there is truth of that. And it is a problem.
And I'm sure there's some nice people too, just like Trump said in his presidential candidacy announcement.
Right, but what I'm saying is the overwhelming perception is this is a major problem, and it's because we've done so much for them and we've given so much for them. Really what they need to have happen is just be cut off and kicked out. And I'm sitting here seeing that, yes, there is a problem, because they are given a lot, they do feel entitled.
Yeah.
And yet at the same time, you can't just say that that's the experience for everyone, that they're just homeless because they don't work.
Right.
You also have to realize, I have some time in Colorado, there's also the dynamic of what other cities around Boulder have done with their homeless policies that have driven homeless people out of some cities and consolidated them into places that are more hospitable, like Boulder. So it isn't just Boulder has a policy and now we've got all these homeless people. It's, you got to look at it systemically throughout the region. What have other towns done that have made Boulder more attractive for homeless people? So it isn't just Boulder. And usually our conversations around poverty, homelessness, personal responsibility, or systemic injustice are super, super oversimplified. These are complicated issues. Poverty is a complicated historical, societal issue. And anybody who wants to say it's all personal responsibility or it's all systemic is not dealing with reality.
Right.
And they don't lend themselves to quick soundbite political solutions. And this is where the church, which isn't subject to the politics of the day as much as politicians are, ought to be stepping in and not only helping their members think about this both biblically and holistically, but coming up with solutions that are biblical and holistic. But when you look at the statistics, there's only a couple of explanations. One, the church is either teaching the wrong things, or two, the church isn't teaching anything. And therefore, people are having their views shaped by non-Christian sources under the name of Christianity. So it is a failure of discipleship in one form or another.
What would they say? What would these white evangelical Christians say is their basis for feeling this way? What do they? What's the scriptural basis?
Somebody said it on Facebook.
No, come on.
Or I don't know. I don't know.
There are admonitions in the New Testament about not being lazy and working with your own.
If you don't work, you don't eat.
If you don't work, you don't eat.
If you don't work, you don't eat.
That's a biblical thing?
No, it's a recommendation to one of the churches in the New Testament.
Paul says in Ephesians 4 that the person who's stealing must stop stealing but work with his own hands. Ironically, not to provide for his needs, but so that he might have something to share with those in need. So that's the funny part, is they cite a verse like that, work with your own hands, but they want to make it, then they ignore the fact that it's so you can be generous to help people who don't have anything.
And the reason I said no when you said that is that a biblical thing, because it is in the Bible, but it's advice that Paul is giving to one specific church. So it's not set up to be a universal principle necessarily. You have to look into the context of what was going on in that church in that day. And the concept there was that the wealthy were underwriting the communion table for everyone else, which was more of a feast than anything else. And some people weren't working and were just kind of depending on the coming in when they all came together and just eat everything, and then you don't have to work.
Paul also tells Timothy that if there are poor people in the church, their own families should seek to care for them first before they go to the church looking for help. So there are all these various pieces, but the idea that the poor are only poor because of their own character failings or laziness is not something that's taught in Scripture. There are so many other reasons why people fall into poverty and need help.
Yeah, actually, my brother taught a lot of them last week in Okoboji. He did a session on Black Lives Matter in an all-white area, of rural Iowa, which was quite fascinating. Actually, I learned a bunch of stuff. Anyway, this is not what we're here to talk about today.
No, it's not.
Believe it or not, Josh is not here to talk about the roots of homelessness in Boulder, Colorado. Are you, Josh?
That's good because I'm very ill-equipped for that.
Well, so why is he here?
Who is Josh? He's a co-host of the NPR radio show and podcast Filmspotting, as well as the editor and film critic at Think Christian, an online faith and culture magazine. He lives in the Chicago area. We've now learned Palos Heights or Palos Hills?
Heights area, yeah.
Okay, Palos Heights. Palos something. What's the root of Palos?
There's three Paloses in this area.
Yeah, and they say it Palos, not Palos, by the way.
They do? Palos?
Yeah, they had to train me to say
really?
Palos. It's like Payless. Palos.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Palos,
What's the third one?
Yeah,
Heights, Hills, and...
Park.
Palos Park. Payless.
So where does that come from?
Payless. I don't know.
I don't know.
It
An
sounds
Indian
Greek.
thing, I'm sure.
Sounds Greek. I'm going to say it's Greek.
Okay.
So...
He has a new book called, hang on, wait for it, Movies Are Prayers, How Films Voice Our Deepest Longings. Here's a quote. Movies are our way of telling God what we think about this world and our place in it. Movies can be many things, escapist experiences, historical artifacts, business ventures, and artistic expressions, to name a few. I'd like to suggest, this is Josh speaking, not me. I'd like to suggest that they can also be prayers.
What prayer is the Emoji Movie?
It's a desperate prayer for cultural relevance.
I am not going to tell you because I'm not going to see it.
Okay, let's start at the beginning. First of all, you grew up, where'd you grow up?
Chicago area, yep.
Okay, and church-going family?
Yes. Yeah, out of a Dutch Reformed tradition.
Okay.
So that's, made for much of the framework for my cultural engagement, specifically with movies.
The Dutch Reform, specifically because it was Dutch Reform?
I think you'll need to unpack that.
Do you think?
like a Abraham Kuyper kind of view of culture?
Yeah, you got it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
What does that mean for those of us?
He quotes Kuyper in his book.
Oh, there you go.
The notion that, Christ is sovereign over all, and that includes every square inch is the Kuyper quote that's most often used. Mm-hmm. Every square inch includes movies, and it includes movies other than faith-based films. When you use Kuyper, it gets dicey because if you look back at his writings around the turn of the century, he wasn't very high on popular art or low art. He was very much a high art guy. So I can't claim that he would, I don't know what he would make of the Emoji Movie, much less than even I would.
The co-star is a poop, Kuyper. What do you think about that?
I do think his principles of common grace, that even those who may not claim to be believers are gifted by God, and so their creative acts and products and works are worthy of consideration, and that God's truth can be found in them. I think that definitely applies to film and other art forms. So yeah, having that as well as, being in a family that approached art that way rather than from a posture of fear. We're talking about postures again. Worried about what culture is going to do to us, but more from a celebratory posture. Celebrating what is good in art while still being discerning. I had my rules too about what I could and couldn't watch, that sort of thing. That all kind of is what I'm referring to when I talk about that faith background.
Did you ever have a point growing up where you either said, I really need to focus on church and stop spending so much time thinking about movies, or said the opposite, I really need to focus on movies and I'm tired of thinking about church?
Not that I can decisively say I remember a point where that occurred either way.
Okay.
I know there have been ebbs and flows, and a lot of that has been tied to my career as editor of Think Christian. That was the first time I got involved with faith-based media, really, and that was in 2011. So I had, a fairly significant number of years working in mainstream media for the Naperville Sun. You guys being Chicago-based, familiar with Naperville. So I was an editor and film critic there for a number of years. So I'm sure that balance shifted depending on what I was doing professionally. Now most of my time is spent in faith-based media, Christian media, and so it shifts things a little bit differently, I suppose.
Yeah. How long have you been doing Filmspotting?
Filmspotting, I joined about a year after I began at Think Christian. So that was an interesting sort of rebalance, because I had made this major career shift into Christian media. did it for about a year, and then got an opportunity to put another foot back into mainstream media at the same time, because Filmspotting airs on the WBEZ here in Chicago, and then of course, most of our listeners do it by podcast. So still a balance.
When they talked to you about that job, had they noticed that you had become an outspoken, Christian film commentator? And did they say, now can you still write without being all Christian-y?
At Filmspotting. There was certainly, an awareness that was my background. I don't recall having like a significant conversation about how is this going to play out. I think it's maybe, I'm just guessing here, but it's maybe because I had built up that mainstream media voice as well. So I had years and years of film reviewing, and it comes down to a matter of audience. This is what I tell people. You keep in mind who you're speaking to and what they're there for, and what perspective they want to hear.
Right.
And then you can, be upfront and honest about the other perspectives you hold. But what you lead with often depends on the audience.
Okay. So, sum up for us really why you wrote the book and what your premise is.
I wrote the book because I've been trying to figure out, since I joined Think Christian, how do you do this thing that could be called Christian film criticism? How do you do it in a way that's different from, when I was in college during the culture wars, it was pretty much limited to counting swear words and nude scenes.
Yeah.
And obviously I went in a different direction because that's, again, not sort of the background. I wouldn't have known how to do that. So I had
you wouldn't know a nude scene if it hit you in the face.
Exactly. I don't see those things. So,
yeah. You don't see race and you don't see nakedness. Just like Stephen Colbert.
What?
I decided.
He used to say his character on his show, he didn't see race.
But not nakedness.
No, I added that. He can't tell if someone is wearing clothes or not. He is so above that.
Well, then he shouldn't leave the house. All right. Sorry about that.
Sorry about that.
No problem. So I'm trying to think of where it was at. So basically writing the book came out of trying to find a different angle to take on movies from a specifically faith perspective. And one of the things I noticed while just watching film in general is how often a movie would act as a surrogate prayer for me. If I was experiencing a need to lament and I watched a film that somehow also expressed lament, it was doing that on my behalf in a way. And again, these are largely films that are not religious in content or theme.
Yeah.
And so I thought that's interesting, and looked for more opportunities where that might have happened, found some, and then thought, I wonder if this is, a fruitful enough approach that it could sustain itself for a larger project. And had a chance to work with IVP and try to make that a full book, and I think it worked. It was fun to do.
Yeah, it was very cool, because I'll read a lot of screenwriting books, for example, that say, there are only 10 stories that have ever been told, and then they'll go through chapter by chapter and classify different movies as, these 10 movies are this story, even though they seem really, really different. And what you do in this book, which is really interesting, is you come up with 9 different types of prayer, and then look at movies that would classify as an expression of that prayer.
Yeah, it's somewhat similar, with the caveat that not all movies are going to fall into this sort of this format. But yeah, it started out, as I said, with lament, and thought, wow, this movie is really capturing the brokenness of the world that I feel and just lifting it up there to God. Now, obviously, the filmmakers in every instance, and often in these instances, didn't intend that. But in becoming its own creative thing at the end of this long filmmaking process, I can feel the movie working also in this way. And so, I go through prayers of anger, prayers of confession, and a host of others. And
lots of, which I really like, lots of Coen Brothers films and Wes Anderson films show up.
Yeah, because those Coen Brothers are just so dense, and they're constantly walking that line between Old Testament and New Testament, where they allow grace and mercy to peek its head, and then they quite often slam it shut.
Right, chop the head off of the mercy.
Chop that head off. My favorite film from last year was Hail Caesar, and I described it as their best Jesus tease yet, because they really wrestle with a lot of these New Testament ideas and come just close enough to believing in them, and then the movie backs away a lot of times. So the Coen brothers are great. Wes Anderson, so funny, and yet at the same time so much going on in his films as well. So yeah, they both get fair play in the book.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that on Wes Anderson, the one film that you focused in on was The Aquatic Life of Steve Zuzu, which is typically not everyone's favorite Wes Anderson film. No,
it's I think of it as the test case. You're not a real Wes Anderson fan unless you like that one as well. and there aren't a ton of us.
So it sounds a little bit like you're simply saying that films are the modern expressions of human longing and the human soul, which you go back to the Psalms. The Psalms run the spectrum of the human-divine relationship and self-expression, and a lot of Christians don't read them as much as they used to, but if we did, we'd be shocked by the varying degrees of faith, frustration, lament, joy, mourning, anger, all that is there. But so you're saying films are just the modern expression of those same human longings, and that's great for provoking our own communion with God. Am I putting words in your mouth, or does that sound accurate?
No. That sounds right, and you're absolutely correct in pointing to the Psalms. I had to force myself to move beyond the Psalms because you could have done this book. You're also right that all of it is there. All those forms of prayer you'll find often, multiple forms in a single psalm.
Yeah.
And of course we get the Lord's Prayer too, which offers within itself a handful of different types of prayer. But yeah, I had to, also make sure I spent some time with Job, because interesting as prayer and how that is reflected in films. Jonah as well. I found myself really revisiting the story of Jonah and talking about how other films are expressing the same things that maybe Jonah experienced.
Like
or
Jonah the VeggieTales movie?
A classic.
I'm sorry, did not make the book.
Okay, so here's my question. As you share this perspective with Christians, or as you recommend even specific films to Christians, what kind of reactions are you getting from people? I'm assuming there are folks like us here on the podcast who are like, this is great, we totally agree with, we're on board. But what about people who aren't quite tracking with you? What resistance is there still to faith intersecting with Hollywood?
Yeah, it really is still the content question. And this concern about, I notice you have a lot of R-rated movies in this book. Or, what do you do about a movie that also includes this, whatever, fill in the objectionable moral behavior often. And again, I don't mean to throw discernment out the window by any means, but I also kind of ask people to pause and say, well, are your prayers perfect? And mine certainly are not. My prayer, I often pray for the wrong thing, I'm sure. I know I use the wrong words. I write about in the book how, at this stage in my life, trying to pray at the end of the day, I fall asleep before I get to anything of real substance. And so there's an acknowledgement there that we're imperfect beings when we pray. And yet we can still, this desire to communicate with God and to express ourselves to God is good. And there's worth and there's value there. And similarly, if we're going to look at movies as prayers, there may be a recognition that this is not something wholly approved or perfect, that we're not baptizing these movies, in other words. But we are asking, what might be of value here? What can we learn about our own prayer life and our prayer postures and what prayer does for us or could do for us?
I gotta say, your book is way theologically deeper than I expected it to be, if just categorizing movies. I mean, quoting old theologians, quoting Richard Foster, it says like you're deeper than one might think.
Well, I'll say I forced myself to do that. It doesn't come naturally. I'm a movie guy, but I did want to make sure that this was founded, in Christian tradition and understanding of prayer, both biblical and in church tradition too. So I did a fair amount of research, and I guess that's why it was a learning process to me too, where I realized, lament also includes praise at the end.
Yeah.
We do recognize that we need to end with a recognition of God, or like confession. Confession isn't just saying, here are the bad things I did. It's a deeper recognition of what what's missing in us.
Yeah.
And it's that relationship with God. So it was a real learning process for me.
Christian.
Can I step into the confessional for a moment?
Yes.
So you've touched on something that's rung a chord with me when you talk about how the content is where a lot of Christians can get tripped up with this idea. And I have been wrestling with this.
They probably shouldn't read the Bible then either.
Well, that's true. I've been wrestling with this because I've recently stumbled upon a Netflix series, which in a lot of senses I take as a movie, because it is. I sort of binge watched it.
Movie alternative.
Right.
Are you not going to share what it is?
I'm about to, so embarrassingly.
Oh,
Can't wait.
Oh, dear.
So a friend of mine just said, you really ought to try watching Grace and Frankie. Have you guys heard of Grace and Frankie?
Yeah, it's.
Is that a bug hit me
Are
in the
you
face?
still going to talk to me? Oh,
That you really had a visceral reaction
Yeah, I
to
did.
that.
I was like,
Grace
whoa.
and Frankie. Yeah, it's Jane Fonda.
It's Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin,
Lily Tomlin.
and then it's Charlie Sheen and Sam Waterston.
Yeah.
But the issues are so not biblical.
Yeah,
they're
their husbands fall in love with each other and leave them.
exactly,
right?
and then they end up living together in a house, and they develop a feminine product to take the place of their husbands, which I will not go into.
Okay.
But there's a lot of discussion about these deep issues which bring on a lot of shame and embarrassment.
Yeah.
And so I have struggled with that because on the other side, as I'm watching that, God has used this movie in a lot of ways to steer my thoughts to stuff that's important.
Yeah.
And deeply theological and meaningful, and something has happened inside of me in a good way by watching it.
So you're asking if that still counts?
So I'm asking, should I repent for watching this movie and finding value in that? But I totally resonate with what you're saying, Josh, because I have been praying through my responses to this movie and wrestling with, should I tell myself I shouldn't watch these things? Or how do I deal with this?
Where do you draw lines, Josh? Do you?
Well,
you can't. You're a critic. You have to watch everything.
Right. Yeah. So you're discerning is what you're doing, Christian, right? You're talking about this process of discernment you're engaged in. And as far as I'm concerned, then you're doing it. God is a forgiving God. And if we happen to watch something that later we realize, that wasn't great for me, maybe I shouldn't have watched it, that's okay. That's not like a mortal, unforgivable sin. I think we put this onus on viewing things that's almost unbearable. Now, at the same time, what do you do with that experience? Do you then know that wasn't good for my faith walk, and you keep that in mind the next time you have a viewing choice? That's maybe the more important question. And then it helps you make the next choice.
Right, but that's what I'm struggling with because season 4 is coming up and I have to choose to watch this voluntarily or not. And I would say watching the first 3 seasons has been beneficial for me spiritually, emotionally, and in my marriage. So what do you do with that?
Then haven't you answered your question?
Is it a case of to the pure all things are pure?
I don't know. I'm lost on this one, so I'm just looking for you guys to either say to me, yes, Christian, which normally I would think the response would be, if it has homosexuality in it, if it has stuff that talks about sex in it, you should not watch it at all. Have nothing to do with it.
Because Christians
Walk
don't
away.
know about sex?
Because you shouldn't be thinking about that or talking about that anywhere other than your own marriage.
I'll be honest, I struggle more in the last, I don't know how long, with violence than I do with sexual content in movies. Like, there are some movies I've seen that they're brilliant films, but sometimes the violence can be so, like Quentin Tarantino films.
Yeah.
The violence can be so over the top.
Yeah.
It disturbs me. And afterwards, I'm really torn because I'm like, I liked that movie or that story or the characters or the human drama that was in it, but it was so bloody and gory. It's like scarred me and something. I don't know. So I come away from some things I've watched going, I don't know,
For me, it's how does it affect me?
Give me an example.
Because there might be things. I tend to watch less edgy things than many people I know. And for me, it's because I feel too impacted afterwards in a negative way. So I try not to watch things that negatively impact me. Now, I'll watch some things that other people won't watch because it doesn't hit me in the same way. It's really
so discernment is very personal.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's what we're revealing here.
Yeah.
And then so there's a flip side to that, right? I think, Phil, what you're getting at is like another way to phrase that question is, has this experience made me more Christ-like? And maybe it has with really rough content because it's made you more empathetic. It's allowed you to walk in someone else's shoes. Maybe it has not because that very same content has made you struggle more with temptations that are part of your personal struggle. And in that case, it's not going to be the same answer for everyone. So now the flip side of that is we deceive ourselves in discernment, right?
I know.
So we can always say, that didn't really affect me. So one thing I encourage often is to do discernment in community, and that can be with a partner who you watch films with regularly. It can be with a group of friends. This is why I love to hear about church movie groups where they watch movies together and discuss them afterwards. And, Phil, you asked, for me professionally, it gets a little tricky there because I am required to see a lot of stuff. And I'm on my own for that a lot. Filmspotting allows me to talk it out with someone else. Thankfully, my wife is a movie fan, so she watches a fair amount with me. But sometimes, a community like Think Christian, where I will get pushback on certain movies I write about, can do some of that discerning for me as well. And then I can say, okay, have I tried to trick myself here in giving reasons for things I found in this movie when it might actually have not been such a great viewing experience for me? So yeah, discernment is personal and should be done in community.
Okay, Josh, you write in the book, you say you're looking for fundamental commonality between sanctuaries and theaters, between church and going to church and going to the movies. You say, I think a more fundamental commonality between sanctuaries and theaters is the notion of focus. We've set aside our time and our space to gather in community and join our concentration. Often the intention is simply escape, but frequently we gather to apply our intellectual, emotional, and artistic prowess toward considering the world and our purpose within it. To a certain extent, that sounds kind of idealized on both ends, why people go to church and why people go to movies.
Sure.
But my question for you, in a world where Hollywood movies are becoming more and more giant escapist productions, is that still true? Do we still really ever go to the theater to apply intellectual prowess?
Isn't that happening to the church too? It's just becoming giant escapist productions.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying it sounds idealistic on both sides to a certain extent. Can you get a mass audience together seeking to be enlightened anymore?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have the Emoji Movie, which we keep, dumping on, even though I don't think any of us have seen it. Yeah. I'm not expecting much out of that, but you also have War for the Planet of the Apes. A movie that's as big as blockbusters get, action sci-fi movie that's, full of biblical allusions. And beyond that, I found important things to write about on it regarding, the Imago Dei, Eden. And so, yeah, even these Hollywood movies offer this stuff because it is common experience that the movies have always captured. They've always been a popular art form.
Okay, so are you saying Marvel superhero movies are prayers?
Yes. I can even answer that.
What?
Yes. Of course.
But it just seems to me that for a movie to really operate on that personal level, it has to come from a person. Whereas so many of those movies are, they're put together by committees. When you've got like 10 screenwriters on a film, can it still have a personal vision in it?
Well, 10 screenwriters is always a bad sign. I'll agree with that. But the thing this is what I love about movies as an art form. Okay, auteurist criticism likes to do what you're talking about, Phil. Who's the director? Let's look at that director's other works. Let's talk about the common themes, the common techniques. And it is the work of one author.
Yeah.
That's a valuable way to look at movies. But what I love about them, and my instinct more, is to realize that all those committees, yes, especially in Hollywood, but those are a lot of creative people too. Special effects artists are creative people.
Yeah.
And when you get hundreds of creative hands on something, in a way, this makes a big blockbuster production more liable to be a prayer than something else, because all of these creative hands somehow form a movie that becomes much more than what the original comic book was, what the Marvel stockholders want, what the director who was given that big project has decided they were going to make. It becomes almost a living, breathing entity of itself. And one options among what that entity could be is a prayer. Not all the Marvel movies do this, of course. Some are better than others. Some are richer than others in theme. But I'm absolutely allowing that possibility. Hey, I am allowing that possibility for the emoji.
Well, so when you're talking about them being a prayer, what I'm hearing is, in a sense, it's not so much a prayer, except the longings of our heart. So those movies are an outpouring of what we desire, right? A lot of times. And they resonate with us, whether it's good or an all-powerful...
I think it's less about desires and more about questions.
But think about the way we engage music. Sometimes when we're in a mood, we look for certain songs to help us express those moods. We do that every Sunday in worship.
Right.
Right? It's a song someone else has written that helps me express what's in my soul.
Right.
Or if I've just broken up with a girlfriend, I want to hear the horrible lamenting songs of, there's all these different moods, and movies function the same way. They can help us get in touch with what's going on inside of us through the brilliance of artists who produce these films that touch something deep in our human experience.
Right.
And in that regard, they aid us in expressing ourselves to God.
Right. So my point being that let's take the Marvel movies with Captain America and Iron Man, etc. Like, we leave those being like, oh, we love them, and what we're yearning for there, what our desire there is for these powerful beings to rescue us from the evil that we experience. And so that's why those are so appealing, which I think is...
Yeah, and he says somewhere else in the book that when you look at the kind of the whole redemptive story of Scripture, the creation, the fall, the redemption, that most movies you can place somewhere along that spectrum.
Mm-hmm. It's an archetypal narrative.
Yeah, they're in there somewhere, and I find that. Okay, last question for you, because then we've taken up too much of your time, and you have to do all of your multiple media ventures that have made you so fantastically wealthy.
Yes, of course.
I know a lot of Christian filmmakers, and an even larger category of I would like to be a Christian filmmakers. What kind of movies do you think Christian filmmakers should try to make? What kind of stories should we try to tell?
I don't get into this world, to be honest with you. It's not one I've had a lot of experience in, so I'm hesitant to speak to.
Okay.
So really, I'm honestly not trying to dodge the question. If I had seen more faith-based films.
Yeah, you've probably seen more than you've probably seen. Don't you have to review them?
No.
Oh.
I mean,
okay.
When I was at the Naperville Sun, they were just starting to get wide release.
Okay.
And then by the time I left there, it became a bigger boom. And so so if you, I don't want to entirely dodge the question. I would just say allow for mystery. I think faith is a mystery.
Yeah.
I think the Bible is full of mystery. I think Christianity is chock full of mystery. And so it's okay if you're a Christian filmmaker and you happen to make a movie that doesn't claim to have every answer. I think, doing that can also be the death of art. And so you're saving yourself a lot by not trying to provide all those answers.
But what if the audience wants all those answers in exchange for their $10?
Okay, then that's fine. Then you're making what I think the few faith-based films I've seen are. They are not evangelistic properties. They're devotional experiences. They're discipleship, maybe even experiences. And there's a value. I don't go to the movies for that. I find that in other places.
Yeah.
But I admit there can be a value for a church group to go to a movie, see a narrative that affirms everything they believe, and leave feeling as some people do when they leave church. So that's an entirely legitimate exercise. I think maybe one reason I have not engaged that world much is because, as I said, that's not what I go to the movies for.
Right. Okay, in a nutshell, what do you go to the movies for besides your job?
I don't know. That goes back to the mystery.
Okay.
You know, I wait to see what the movies are going to bring to me, because countless times it's been something wonderful.
Favorite movie you've seen in the last year?
Dunkirk.
Oh, I just saw that.
Of this year, 2017. Right now, it's at the top of my list.
Okay.
Yeah, an amazing film about our deep need to be rescued, to need salvation.
Yeah.
So one last question. In reading your book, what do you hope I walk away with? How should I be changed, or what, how will this impact me if I read your book?
Yeah, it kind of depends what your posture is when you're reading it. I mean, just from you talking about your Netflix experiences, it seems like you do maybe still wrestle with this question of discernment. And so hopefully it would offer you maybe another way to think about that discerning process, and the role that grace plays as a viewer, that how you can bring grace to the viewing process maybe is something that it might offer to you.
Awesome.
Cool. Do you have your own website, or do we have to find you on other people's websites?
Well, Filmspotting is a podcast. Find it where people are listening to this. ThinkChristian.net is my faith in film writing. And I do, of course, have a website, LarsenOnFilm.com, where I write about all the movies I see. Larsen with an E. ELARSEN.com. You got it.
Cool. Thanks for being on the show, Josh. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Now is the part of the show where I sum up everything we've said with a really bad song. He writes about movies. He's really, really groovy. He thinks they're also prayers. He thinks about men in tights while sitting in Payless Heights. But whether it's Batman or the Coen brothers, is it okay to watch this film with my mother? Oh, thanks, Josh Larsen, for helping us out. Now I see that prayer is what good movies are about, and I'm gonna go out to my church and shout, hey, let's skip the sermon and go and watch Batman Returns. Okay, thanks for being here, Josh.
Thank you.
Sky, book. Still have a book?
Yes. Please buy it. What's wrong with religion.com, or you can get it on Amazon. And thank you for everyone who's left reviews. I think we're still cruising at 5 stars after 30 plus reviews.
Woo,
like, people love
awesome.
this book. It's not my most reviewed book. It is my best reviewed book, and that should tell you something.
Oh,
that's great.
What's wrong with religion? Christian, you doing okay? Anything we need to promote to help you?
Yes, I need more voiceover jobs.
Okay. Christian Christian.
No, neighborladyvo.com.
neighborladyvo.com. And check out all of Josh's stuff at larsen.com and thinkchristian.net. I was on there. I was reading some of his reviews, and they're really good. And we will see you all next week. Thank you very much.
Bye, everybody.
The Phil Vischer podcast is produced by Phil Vischer Enterprises and recorded live at Jellyfish Lab Studios. This episode was edited by Jason Rugg and was fact-checked by absolutely no one. For more information, go to philvischer.com.